Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to take a look at the upcoming major lunation, the full moon, that's coming up on the 27th, which is Saturday. And we do want to take a look into that chart and see it as both the culmination of the previous new moon and also, by coincidence, the jumping off point of the new month, because it's only 2 days before March 1st. So there will be kind of a second half of the cycle that lasts until the 13th of March, which is actually the next new moon. So I'm going to take a look at a couple of charts coming up. And this time, when we select the chart, I'm going to be careful. I guess, I don't know how many of you saw last time I picked the wrong window and it didn't work when we tried to change the chart. So that was kind of annoying. But here we are having a look at this full moon coming up around midnight, actually, just at the very early hours of Saturday. So it's a Saturday phenomenon, but it will be happening at midnight the night before. It'll be a beautiful night if it's clear to see the full moon. And while we're at it, looking at this full moon, let's try to see what it lines up with in terms of the rest of the planets in the chart. And you know, these full moons have been lining up with Uranus one way or another. This happens to be here, a sextile between Sun and Uranus has gotten to 7 degrees and a half of Taurus. So Uranus is brought into this picture, as is, of course, Saturn brought into this picture at 8 degrees and a quarter of Aquarius. And we want to also get to some other planets occupying the 7-degree mark, which is to say Chiron is at 7 degrees of Aries, and Maki, one of these new planets beyond Pluto, which are proving to be quite significant in charts, is at 7 degrees, exactly opposite of Libra. So all of these planets occupying 7 or 8 degrees, including the Sun and Moon, in opposition. So what does that tell us? It brings these planets more to the forefront. And what we're seeing, I think the primary astrological aspect of this new year, you know, last year was definitely Saturn and Pluto in combination, which was very dire. And this year, it is still a focus to some extent on Pluto. However, it is also a focus in the fact of this Saturn and Uranus combination. They're square right now. And, you know, Saturn moves faster than Uranus. It's closer to the Sun. It takes 30 years to go around. Uranus takes 84 years. Saturn is less than 30, around 28, 29. So very interestingly, though, the retrogradation comes in. And then, let's look at the next retrograde of Saturn, which I can right-click on it with the TimePassages Software. And the next station is in May at 13 degrees of Aquarius. So it's coming up in a couple of months here. And basically, the dance of Saturn and Uranus this year is quite interesting because Saturn gets a little bit further, and also Uranus is moving a little bit further. So they stay in touch with each other. You could say within 2 degrees for a while, and then it gets to be a little bit more than that. But by the middle of May, because that's when Saturn is starting to slow down, they will kind of get within 2 degrees again of each other. And then Saturn will station before Uranus does. So Saturn will station, Uranus will be moving ahead still, and therefore catching up to the position of Saturn. So they basically stay in connection with each other within 2 degrees or 3 degrees or so, pretty much all year. And right up through, there's another close hit in December till about January of 2022. So we're looking at a Saturn-Uranus year. And what does that tell us? Well, a couple things. One is we know that Saturn is in Uranus's sign of Aquarius, whereas Uranus is in an Earth sign more like Saturn, which rules the Earth sign of Capricorn. So we do have a mutual reception of a sort, not exactly a mutual reception, but we do have a certain degree, a quality of mutual reception. So these are entangled with each other. And it's interesting to me, you know, the first thing that comes to mind with Saturn and Uranus is Saturn is the conservative approach, you know, the limitation. No, you can't do that. No, that's a bad idea. Don't go too far too fast. And on the other hand, Uranus is all about stepping off the edge of the cliff. As you can see in the Tarot card of the Fool, which represents Uranus in the Tarot, even though that was a later association after the medieval Tarot came about. But you still have that wonderful image of it's the reincarnation, the Fool carrying his products from his last lifetime, his wisdom that gained from his last lifetime on his back, stepping off the edge of the cliff with abandon because he knows that he's going to be held up. So perhaps having a certain amount of faith in the universe. They say also that Uranus rules astrology. And Uranus does connect us to the transpersonal in a way that Saturn does not. Saturn represents the last planet in the series of planets going further and further outward that represents the 3D physical world more completely than the beyond that. Whereas we're beginning to recognize in this culture that there is a lot that goes on deep inside the unconscious depths of the psychology in a transpersonal way, dimensions beyond the 3D physical world. And so those outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, do bring us toward that conception, that understanding. Neptune is associated with psychic resonance, with communication with departed spirits, things like that. And Pluto, too, goes to the great depth within the psyche where the soul resides, which you can also identify with a higher self. And you can identify that really with higher planes of connection. There's a way that astrology mirrors the events in the physical world. How does that even happen? Isn't that a miracle? Isn't that amazing? Well, there's a way of looking at it as there's a tapestry of higher dimensions that all connect to each other. And there's a way that through those connections beyond the physical, we can see relationships between the physical presence of planets circling in their cycles and the events on life on Earth. Very beautifully symbolically organized in the fact that if you look at the sun and the moon, they subtend the same size disk. The moon in a perfect solar eclipse, all you see is the atmosphere of the sun, the beautiful sight of the diamond body, the black circle of the moon blocking the sun, and then the corona of the sun on the outside of that. Why are those two disks identical in size? Is there an explanation? There's no physical explanation. The moon is 240,000 miles away on average, and it has a certain size, certain diameter, and by George, the disk is the same size disk as the disk of the sun at 93 million miles, which is, of course, gigantic, a star, much huger than any of the planets. So there's no explanation in the physical world or in the world of science for those two disks to be the same size, but in astrology, it does make sense because the universe somehow is organized to help us grow in understanding. We are souls reincarnating into a physical space so that we can learn and we can explore decisions and processes that have to do with being in the physical space. That's supposedly the learning situation that we have here on Earth. So that's the philosophy. And to say that Saturn and Uranus are contrasts, you see, is to say that the physical is contrasted with what is beyond the physical. And Uranus in life always represents surprises, new directions, sudden breakthroughs, can be brilliant as far as ideas, can be brilliant as far as transcending a previous situation. It's a revolutionary planet, really. Discovered at the time of both the American and the French revolutions, actually, that same decade, not decade, but century, the 1700s. So anyway, what we see in the zeitgeist with Saturn and Uranus in this contrasting situation is we see conservative viewpoints and progressive viewpoints in conflict and in conflict with each other. That's a simplistic approach, I believe. Another way to look at it is the blending of the conservative and the progressive approach. In other words, the progressive approach is great, yes, but can it go too fast, too far? Yes, you have to rein yourself in. So there's a tug of war between the idea of limitation and the idea of going slowly and the idea of taking each step carefully like a mountain goat on the cliff, watching their footing. And there is also the idea of transcending that simplistic way of being in the world to recognize that there are breakthroughs. There are ways that you can correct the existing zeitgeist, correct the existing paradigm for belief. And so those things are in play with each other this whole year. And it's fascinating, of course, to see, for example, in the political situation in the United States, we see a progressive administration coming in. We see conservative voices on the Republican side of the aisle objecting to some of the appointments that are being made or plans that are being made. You know, how many trillions, is it 1.9 trillion that the Democrats want to do? How much do we spend, or do we be more careful, or are we supposed to be more cautious with that? And the progressive viewpoint is that we need to spend in order to prevent the economy from failing further, in order to prop up the economy now, get people back to work, create new infrastructure, which is, again, see, infrastructure is also, you know, it's a new idea. Some of the infrastructure they're proposing is very revolutionary, namely to have an electric fleet by 2030 in the United States government cars, the fleet of cars. And on the other hand, you have to do that step by step, and you have to have the charging stations, and you have to have the financing, and you have to have things. So it's a combination of the practical and the innovative and what's coming further. And we are, in some sense, in a kind of an Aquarian period, because we do have that notion that, by George, Saturn and Jupiter coming together at 0 degrees of Aquarius is significant, especially since they did it exactly as the sun entered Capricorn on the solstice, the winter solstice, the Capricorn solstice, you could say, of December 21st last year. So this is all a very fascinating time to be looking at what's going on, to be looking within your own life where you have to make changes. As you do make these changes, because Pluto is still very active, we're still in an evolutionary cycle, we're still figuring out what we can keep and what we have to let go of in order to make the evolutionary progress that we need to make. So that is one thing. And then let's talk about also, and then there's one more thing about Saturn and Uranus, which was brought forward by Rick Tarnas when he was talking about the Tea Party in 2010, which he said, not only do we have conservative, and that was an opposition of Saturn and Uranus, well, not only do we have a conservative versus progressive agenda, but the conservatives are acting like rebels. The Tea Party people were kind of like rebels, and we see that again today, where the people storming the Capitol had a revisionist agenda in mind. They wanted to keep the status quo. They wanted to keep the president that they already had, the Trump presidency, which is in some ways a throwback to previous authoritarian ideas, you know. And meanwhile, they were acting in a rebellious kind of fashion to do it. They were breaking down the barricade, breaking down the walls. So very interesting to see how these things are playing out. But I don't want to leave this chart without mentioning these other planets. Now, Chiron being exactly opposite Maki-Maki and triggered by this full moon being a sextile, sorry, that's not true, a semi-sextile from the sun to Chiron within about 1.5 degrees or almost 2 degrees. And the moon participating as well in the opposition to the sun. Now, what we have as well with Maki-Maki, I'm sorry, with Chiron, what we have as well is Maki-Maki at 7 degrees of Libra. Now, Maki-Maki and Haumea both go to great depth within the psyche, as do these farther planets, you know, starting with Pluto and also with Eris. Eris is this feminine warrior energy and supportive soul intention, what's deep within you. And these new planets that are named after indigenous gods and goddesses do also definitely have to do with understanding our connection to nature, understanding that nature is part of us and we are part of nature, especially as we go to the psychological depths and the symbolic depths and the archetypes of the unconscious, which Jung was able to point out, which are in some sense a very natural phenomenon. You could think of also natural law. You could think of doing the right thing. How do we know what's the right thing? You know, it's in a way, it's all up for grabs, right? We can do whatever we want to do, but on the other hand, and we're not necessarily, we are reined in by the society and its rules and laws, but we're not necessarily reined in by that because we can break through those rules and laws, right? But on the other hand, there is a natural order of things which says, be kind, which says, don't steal from others, don't treat others badly. The golden rule, treat others like you would like to be treated yourself. You know, so I think those things come into play with these new planets. And with the Chiron possibilities in Aries, and with Maki-Maki coming into that, I think you might have a case for saying that there are unconscious contents that we're becoming more aware of, which could be the wounded part of ourselves that holds us back until we tune in, until we try to see that as just natural, until we try to see that as just part of ourselves and recognize that those dark places within us that may be the residue of early childhood trauma, that they need our help and our kind attention and a loving hand from us as the new parent. It's reparenting, to be able to reach down into that wounded place. And if you do have these things and you pay attention and you watch that coming up, and there's anger coming up, or there's upset coming up, or you feel less than, those are residues from the past when you were somewhat traumatized psychologically by the parental situation, usually the parents, could be siblings, but early childhood experiences. And if you can tune into it and see where the hurt is and see where that bad feeling originates and try to kind of work with it and make it a little better, rewrite the script. But being aware of it is so important. That is the important thing. Now, I'll show you how these manifest also in coming charts, because interestingly, were we to take a look at the full moon 30 days from now, which is going to be the full moon of March, which is the 28th, also on a weekend, on Sunday, the 28th of March. Now the sun and moon are still at 8 degrees of their respective signs, but they've moved over one sign. And of course now, look at this triple conjunction, all at 8 degrees, all partile with the sun, Chiron, and Venus. So this is one reason I was bringing that up, because this really is the next 30 days of our time as we go through the month of March. And we do have this other full moon at the end of March, which brings, again, at this point, retrograding. Maki has gone to 6 degrees, 50 minutes. But you can see that the sun and moon are really lighting up this opposition. And that at 8 degrees also now is Uranus in this particular pattern. Saturn has moved beyond where its 8 degree mark. So this is a little bit less, but it's still within a couple of degrees, but it's a little bit less active. The Saturn Uranus is very active at the beginning of the month. And this is toward the end of the month when Chiron comes much more into play and lit up by both the sun and Venus. You can make a lot out of this chart if you look into it. Venus being the natural ruler of Libra, which is the Libra moon, which is also conjunct Maki. So those things that I was saying really apply. I am expecting, by the way, Maki seems to have more of an activist agenda than Haumea. So I am actually expecting that there will be environmental success that we will see maybe by this weekend, the end of this month, but also maybe by the end of March as well. Some kind of push emotionally to try to really make it real. The changes that we have to make in the Earth environment to correct for climate change, which is so important right now for our whole society. Well, in between those two is, of course, the new moon of mid-March, which is 13th, which is going to be again at 23 degrees. There's a line up there that has Neptune in it. Neptune can be either deceptiveness or it can be idealism. So there's kind of a beautiful idealism with Venus and Neptune in this configuration. These upcoming configurations are really pretty cool. I expect a lot of things are changing. People are really getting into a new pattern with themselves, with oneself. What am I up to? What am I supposed to be doing? And again, at this point, now, Saturn is at 9 degrees, and this is before the end of the month. So Saturn is still at 9 degrees, and here's Uranus at 8 degrees. So that's still active and just involved with this opposition again, which is always there, this over these next little while between Maki and Chiron. So I don't want to go through all these charts in great detail right now, of course. We wanted to mainly sum up the full moon that's coming up this weekend. And I think I've given you a little taste of what it might be like. Remember to trust yourself. Inner guidance is so important, and it really is part of the picture of astrology. Let me stop the screen and go back to this view and just sum up and say, we're here for a reason. We're here to make things happen for ourselves, for the society. We're here to try to get to our most authentic self. If we can tune into Eris within our chart, it's where we have our deepest principles that we feel like we have to, that's a bottom line principle we have to work for. And so tuning into that, you find your life purpose, you find your mission, and nothing can harm you because I'm doing my mission here, I'm doing what I can do, and that's all we can do, but we can help each other. by our example, by our actions, by our kindness, and try to really live in the possibility of a new world that the hippie movement of the 60s and early 70s was just beginning to sense and just beginning to get the idea of. Helped us see if we can make that idea of love and kindness as a part of our way of life. Put flowers in the muzzles of the guns, right? And see if we can move in that way toward a better grasp of a 21st century society that includes the spiritual approaches that we know are part of our lives, fundamental to our lives. Okay, well, that's it. See you soon. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.